I remember well the night Neville came to me, carrying in his eyes the unease of someone who no longer knows who to turn to. He had tried prayers, sought advice, and hoped the world would move in his favor, but everything seemed to remain still. He felt imprisoned by circumstances, like so many men who believe life is written from the outside in, as if they were leaves carried by the wind. I looked at him and immediately perceived his confusion. He thought external conditions were masters of his life when, in truth, they were only reflections of what he silently held within himself. Neville asked me, "What must I do to make things change? Where can I find the key?" I didn't give him vague promises or moral advice. I went straight to the point, as I always do. Listen to me, Neville. What you see outside is not the cause, but the effect. Not the root, but the shadow. The external world is merely a mirror of what you have chosen to accept as true within yourself, nothing more. He frowned as if he didn't understand, and I continued. You think you are a hostage to the facts, but it is the facts that are hostage to the state you inhabit. As long as you keep looking to the world to change, you will remain its slave. But the moment you dare to assume within yourself the scene already concluded, life will bend to that decree. When you visualize in this way, Neville, you don't wait for it to happen. You order that it already is, and the world, which is nothing more than an echo, obeys you. It was at that moment that he began to perceive, not completely because the intellect resists, but a spark ignited in him. I showed him that imagination is not daydreaming, not an escape. It is creative power. When used correctly, it governs all reality. And this, I told him, and I tell you now, is the secret that transforms existence. Everything you call reality is simply life's obedience to the internal state you choose to inhabit. When Neville, still incredulous, heard me say that the first step was to assume the end, he almost laughed. To his logical mind, that seemed absurd. How could someone live the result before any sign? How could someone declare as true something that his eyes did not see? He said to me, "But isn't that self-deception? Aren't I just lying to myself?" I stared at him in silence for a moment, letting the unease consume him, and then I answered firmly, "The lie, Neville, is believing that what you see outside is more real than what you can sustain within yourself. The only falsehood is giving power to appearances. The truth is what you choose to assume as already being yours. Life doesn't wait for proof. Life obeys the decree of a convinced heart." I explained to him that assuming the end was not desiring. Desire always points to the distance, to the lack, to the not yet. Desire cries out, one day it will be, but assuming the end is completely different. It's retreating in silence, closing your eyes, and dressing the scene as if it were a memory. It's feeling the embrace already received. It's walking through the house already acquired. It's hearing the voice that confirms what was so sought after. When the end is truly assumed, the soul no longer begs or questions. It simply rests in the accomplished fact. I told him, "Don't think about what is yet to come. Think about what already is. Don't ask for it to happen. Celebrate as someone who has already lived it." Neville, still resistant, replied, "But how can I believe in something I don't see?" And I answered him with the same clarity as always. It is not a matter of believing with your eyes, but of believing with your being. The tree doesn't need to wait for spring to know that it will bear fruit. It already carries the season in its seed. In the same way, you don't need to wait for the world to give you signs to know that the end is already yours. You are the seed, and within you the harvest is already guaranteed. I then led him to an exercise. I told him to close his eyes and imagine himself already where he desired to be. I asked him not to be a mere spectator, but a participant in the scene, to feel the textures, to hear the sounds, to breathe the air of that environment. Don't stay outside the vision, Neville. Enter it as someone who already lives there. Make the scene so real that when you open your eyes, you feel like you've returned from a trip, not that you dreamed. He practiced with effort, and soon the doubt came. What if I lose focus? What if I can't sustain it? I told him, "Don't worry about stumbling. Each return to the scene is like hammering the same stake until the ground yields. It's not an isolated act that creates, but the repeated conviction until it becomes natural. Sustain the memory until the heart no longer asks but affirms, "This is mine." Over time, Neville began to understand. The change didn't come from the outside in, but from the inside out. He noticed that upon assuming the end, his posture changed. His words changed. His atmosphere changed. And when he already moved as someone who possessed that thing in secret, the circumstances of the external world rearranged themselves like obedient pieces. Then I said to him, "Do you see now? The end is not a distant promise. The end is the only true beginning. If you dare to live it within yourself, the world will have no choice but to bow before your conviction." That's how he learned, and that's how I teach you now. The first step is always this: assume the end. Not as desire, not as hope, but as memory. Live the scene as if it were already your story, and you will see that all life bends to the decree you sustained in silence. Neville didn't understand why I was telling him to despise appearances. He was used to looking at the facts, at the numbers, at what the eyes could measure. "But master," he said to me, "if my pockets are empty, how can I feel wealth? If the door seems closed, how will I believe that it is already open?" I answered him, "That is precisely why you remain trapped, Neville, because you give authority to the shadows as if they were the light itself. What you call reality is merely the residue of what has already been created. It is the harvest of seeds you planted yesterday. But the man who wishes to change tomorrow must no longer bow before today. Learn to see beyond what your eyes show you." I showed him that appearances are deceptive because they always carry a delay. What we see is always the past. The body you have today is the fruit of states assumed before. The money or lack of it you have in your hands is the result of images sustained in another time. If you accept this as definitive, you will be imprisoned in endless cycles. I told him, when someone who is sick accepts the illness as their final reality, it consumes them. But when they dare, in the midst of the pain, to despise the visible picture and assume health, then the invisible begins to rewrite the visible. Learn this, Neville. Appearance is not a sentence. It's just an echo. He insisted. "But what if the appearance shouts louder than my vision?" I told him. "Then close your ears to the shout and open your heart to the whisper of truth. You are not called to fight against the facts, but to ignore them as one ignores a lie that has already been unmasked. The beggar on the street may seem poor, but if he assumes within himself the dignity of abundance, sooner or later the world will have to respond to him. The difference lies in which voice he decides to honor: the voice of misery that the eyes show, or the voice of wealth that the heart dares to assume." To make him understand better, I led him to a simple practice. I asked him, in the face of a limited scenario, to close his eyes and refuse the narrative he was telling. I told him, "Look at this picture and say, 'This is shadow, not essence. It is not my destiny. It is just a reflection that no longer has strength. Now choose within yourself the true scene and give it more credit than you gave to the world." Thus, little by little, he learned to give more weight to the inner vision than to the outer one. I explained to him that despising appearances is not denying their existence, but refusing their authority. A king may listen to rumors in his palace, but he does not bow to them. His word is law. So too the awakened man. He may see limitations before him, but he does not grant them power. He sustains his inner order until the appearance, like a servant, bows. Neville, by practicing this, discovered something powerful. When he stopped reacting to circumstances and started treating them as empty shells, they began to change effortlessly. What seemed like an obstacle dissolved. What seemed like a lack turned into abundance, because they no longer had anywhere to lean on. I then said to him, "Do you understand now? Reality is not what you see, but what you dare to assume. When you despise appearances, you free yourself from the prison of the past and allow the new state to flourish." That's how Neville realized that circumstances have no voice of their own. They are just reflections of a deeper decree. And so I say to you too, do not fear what you see. Do not cling to what seems. The power is not outside. Learn to ignore the lie of appearances and to live the truth of the chosen state, and you will see how everything that seemed fixed will turn to dust before your conviction. Neville took a while to understand what I meant when I ordered him to inhabit the scene until it is a memory. For him, imagining was a fleeting exercise, almost like a dream that is visited for moments and soon fades away. I showed him that this is not enough. What creates is not the momentary fantasy, but the constancy of an assumed memory. I told him, don't visit the state as a tourist, Neville. Live in it as a resident. Enter and never leave again. He closed his eyes and tried to visualize the scene he desired. In the beginning, his thoughts scattered. His mind wandered to the difficulties, and doubt crept in like a thief. I interrupted him. It doesn't matter if the world shouts the opposite to you. Your task is to sustain the scene as someone who remembers an accomplished fact. You don't desire, you don't wait, you remember. He still didn't understand the difference between dreaming and remembering. So I insisted, when you remember something, you don't ask if it will happen. You already know it was. That's the key. Live the future as a memory, and it will have no choice but to become the present. To make it clearer, I asked him to imagine a simple action, holding in his hands a letter from his homeland announcing what he so desired. I told him, don't stay watching from the outside. Feel the paper between your fingers. Listen to the sound as you open the envelope. Read the words written. React as you would react if it were real. Smile, sigh, give thanks. Don't stop until your heart is convinced that this has already happened. He tried. In the beginning, it was just effort. But upon repeating, something changed. His lips curved into an involuntary smile, his shoulders relaxed, and I saw in his closed eyes the spark of conviction. I interrupted him and asked, "What do you feel now?" He replied, "It's like I really lived it, like it's a memory of something that already happened." I confirmed, "Exactly. This is the secret. Imagination, when sustained until it becomes natural, engraves in the being a decree that the visible world cannot resist." I explained to him that the common mistake of men is to play at imagining for a few seconds and then return to the old state, as one releases the rudder of a ship in the middle of the crossing. But what governs is not the brief flash, but the insistence until the scene becomes second nature. Repeat, I told him. Repeat until your heart no longer asks for signs, but rests in the fact. Until when you think about it, you no longer feel hope but certainty, because at that point, the external world has already been defeated. Neville realized that something inside him had changed before anything outside moved. That was the first time he understood that inner peace is the first sign of creation accomplished. When the scene becomes memory, the man stops fighting, stops searching, and just lives in rest. And like night that turns into day, life begins to respond. Thus he learned, and thus I teach you now. It is not enough to dream. It is not enough to desire. It is necessary to inhabit the scene with such fidelity that it becomes a memory engraved in you. Sustain it until it is more real than what you see with your eyes, and you will see the world bend without effort. For that which is already memory in the imagination has no choice but to become fact in time. Neville used to read the scriptures like most men. He saw in them accounts of the past, distant stories of characters he considered greater than himself. One day I showed him the Bible open and said, "As long as you read it as if it were a record of others, you will remain blind to its true power. Each written word is a mirror of what happens in you. They are not dead stories. They are living instructions." He looked at me intrigued, as if he had never heard that before, and asked, "So everything that is written is about me?" I looked at him firmly and replied, "About you, Neville, and about every man who dares to understand. There is no past there. There is a map of the mind and law of life." I led him to a well-known passage, "If you believe, you will see the glory of God." He read that as if it were a distant promise, but I said to him, "It is not a promise, but an immediate condition. To believe is to assume the state. To see the glory is to see it appear in the world. There is no waiting, there is no interval. Scripture does not order you to wait for the favor of heaven, but orders you to assume the faith now, and the now will become form." He then asked me, "And when the text speaks of moving mountains, isn't that just a metaphor?" I laughed at his doubt and replied, "The mountain is your difficulty. It can be poverty, illness, abandonment, fear. And faith is your conviction that the state is already yours. When you assume within yourself that you have already overcome it, the mountain loses its strength, not because it disappears immediately, but because the world does not resist the inner decree, and sooner or later what seemed like an obstacle will be dust under your feet." So that he would understand, I gave him an exercise. Read the text as if it were speech directed to you, not to a distant character. When you read about Moses opening the sea, don't think of a man and a people thousands of years ago. See yourself before your waters of impossibility. The staff is your sustained imagination, and the sea that opens is the path that emerges when you dare to believe. Each passage is a code. Decipher it, and you will see that Scripture does not narrate what was, but what is and always will be. Neville was silent, absorbing. It was as if the veil had fallen from his eyes. He realized that the Bible, far from being a book of stories, was a manual of creative power. So he said, "Each character is myself in different states." And I confirmed, "Yes, Neville, you are the David who faces giants. You are the prodigal son who returns home. You are the blind man who regains his sight. Each narrative is your own inner drama. When you read it like this, no longer as a spectator, but as a protagonist, you will understand that the Word was made flesh in you." He began to practice this reading, and with each new page, his faith ceased to be theory and became experience. Scripture ceased to be distant and became alive, because each verse was an immediate order to assume the state. And I told him, just as the Word does not return empty, so too your imagination, when sustained, will not fail, for both are one and the same. Scripture is just the reflection of the law that already acts in you. Thus he learned, and thus I teach you now. Do not read the text as a memory of a dead past, but as a key to your present. Each promise is a decree. Each miracle is an instruction. See yourselves in the symbols. Assume faith as a state, and you will discover that what you judge to be a metaphor is practice, and what you called history is your own destiny in motion. Neville had already understood the power of assuming the end, of despising appearances, of inhabiting the scene as memory, and of reading the Scriptures as a living law. But he was still missing something essential: constancy. For he, like so many, flared up with conviction in one moment and soon yielded to discouragement in the next. It was then that I said to him with severity, "Discipline is sovereignty. Without it, all understanding is lost like water between your fingers." I explained to him that the mind, accustomed to wandering, needs governance. It is not enough to imagine once and expect the world to bend. It is necessary to return night after night to the desired scene. It is necessary to deny every morning the lies of fear that try to steal your vision. You must be faithful to the state as a king is faithful to his throne. If you abandon the position, another will take the place, and the world will reflect your oscillation. He asked me, "But isn't it tiring to fight against thoughts?" I replied, "It is not a fight. It is vigilance. I am not asking you for desperate effort, but for serene firmness. When a thought of doubt arises, do not feed it. Return to the state you have chosen as one returns home. Discipline is not weight. It is constant practice until it becomes natural. The one who disciplines himself no longer strives. He lives." I gave him a simple example. When a musician practices, he repeats the same notes until his fingers move without thinking. So too, you repeat the vision until your soul no longer needs to force, but naturally breathes the chosen state. And then, When external life tries to drag you away, your conviction will be stronger than any appearance. Neville began to practice this discipline. In the beginning, he failed. At night, he tried to dress the desired scene, but soon gave in to weariness. I told him, even if you fall asleep in the middle of the vision, you have already sown in the garden of the invisible. Keep going. Don't stop. Little by little, the habit shaped him. He no longer needed effort to feel. It was enough to close his eyes, and the assumed memory enveloped him like a garment. I also showed him that discipline is denying oneself, not in sacrifice, but in firmness. I told him, deny the old story. Deny the old self that insists on returning. Don't listen to it anymore. Every time fear speaks, answer in silence. It is already done. Every time the appearance rises up, face it as a powerless shadow. Your fidelity to the state is what seals your creation. Over time, Neville became a master at this. He no longer chased after signs. He no longer allowed himself to be shaken by circumstances. His discipline made him king of himself. And I said to him, do you see now, Neville? Freedom is not in having control of the world, but in having governance of your interior. For he who reigns within himself will inevitably see the world bow before him. Thus I say to you now, without discipline, imagination is wind. With discipline, it is law. It is not enough to know the principles. It is necessary to practice them until they become your second nature. Make of each night your altar, of each morning your decree, and of each thought your servant. Sustain the state with fidelity, and nothing, absolutely nothing, will be able to resist your command. That's how I instructed Neville, and that's how I instruct you. All that seems solid and immovable out there is just a reflection of what you have chosen to sustain within. The world is not your master, it is your mirror. Neville learned to assume the end, to despise appearances, to inhabit the scene as memory, to read the scriptures as a living map, and to seal everything with discipline. These principles were not theory for him. They became practice. They became flesh. And the same can and must happen with you. Do not beg any longer for signs. Do not prostrate yourselves before circumstances as servants of a reality that has no power of its own. Life obeys you always. If you are not yet living what you desire, it is because you have not yet dared to assume it with the firmness of someone who knows it already is. The world has no choice before a convinced heart. Therefore, stop asking, stop begging, stop waiting. Assume within yourselves now the state that you desire. Sustain it as someone who already possesses it, and you will see the invisible organize the visible. The obstacles dissolve, the doors open, not because the world changed of its own will, but because they obey the order that came from you. I tell you with the same force with which I told Neville, when you visualize like this, everything changes instantly. Choose today to live as creators and no longer as beggars, for you are already he, and the kingdom you seek is within.